All right, at the same time, back here at home, a lot going on. Wisconsin Republicans really in a state of angst, Emily.
They sure are.
They're really in their feelings right now.
Yes, Krystal flagged this long Politico magazine reported piece from Wisconsin. We can go ahead and throw C1 up on the screen. The headline from Politico is, quote, "Numbers nobody has ever seen, how the GOP lost Wisconsin." Now, it's a very interesting glance into the dynamics in a state where a lot of people were surprised to see the liberal Supreme Court justice win that election not too long ago, when Wisconsin Republicans, and the media really took this narrative from Wisconsin Republicans, were riding high for more than a decade. After Act 10 in 2011, the election of Scott Walker in 2010, 2011, you have Act 10, the recall that was won, and then this presaged the Trump era in general. You had people like Sean Duffy winning Wisconsin's 7th district, which had been David Obey's district for 40 years. You had a Democrat in that district for 40 years, super rural. You had, paper mills that were shut down because of bad trade deals and all of that stuff, problems with opioids, drugs, addiction, all of that. And in 2010, that district flipped Republican. So 6 years before Donald Trump. So Wisconsin Republicans have been making those kinds of gains for years. And then it culminated in Trump's narrow victory in the state of Wisconsin and Hillary Clinton sort of famously not going to Wisconsin. And now you have a really difficult situation for Wisconsin Republicans. Ron Johnson barely eked out a win over someone Republicans saw as eminently beatable.
Well, and Democrats kind of gave up on that race. And if they hadn't, it might have actually gone in the other direction because they stopped focusing on it. They thought it was a lost cause. And then Ron Johnson barely squeaks through a victory.
Right. And so Politico is looking at how you have Protasewicz, the liberal Supreme Court justice. How does she win? And Politico is coming down the side and saying, actually quoting state Democrats. This is from the Democratic Party chairman in Wisconsin. He said he referred to an internal Democratic poll conducted after the election, shared with me later by a Democratic operative in the state, that showed abortion, while slightly more resident an issue for voters in the Democratic-leaning media markets around Madison, Milwaukee, and Eau Claire, La Crosse, was the main vote driver for Protasewicz in every market in the state. It was an issue that wasn't just working for Democrats in big cities, but in rural areas too. That is really important because for Wisconsin Democrats, you need to have huge turnout in Milwaukee and Madison, basically, because that's where the population of Wisconsin is. The rest of the state is pretty scattered and rural. But if you can also bring rural voters into that coalition, you're taking away the Republican voters who were brought to the party. In some cases, this is lifetime Union Democrats, people who voted for David Obey for 40 years. If you can't get them, maybe they actually vote Dem, but maybe they just don't vote. If you can't get them, you're in big trouble.
Well, and all you have to do is eat into the margins. You don't have to win rural counties. If you're Democrats and you're driving up the numbers in the suburbs and you're pulling in huge numbers in the cities, if you just eat into the Republican margin a little bit in rural America, then you're really in business here. And I did think that was the most interesting piece. There were two parts of this article that I found most interesting. First of all, Democrats have really bet on this new growing demographic. That's why they've focused, they've sort of given up on Iowa. And instead, they're like, we're going to win Georgia and we're going to win Arizona. We're going to go places that are really diverse and that have a large college educated population because that's where we're having our easiest time sort of growing our base. Wisconsin is a different model, though. And this was one of the places that, some of the sort of lazy assumptions of, if things are headed in this direction, they're going to keep heading in this direction was first it's Wisconsin and Michigan, and then it's going to be Minnesota, and you're going to all these blue wall, traditional Midwestern industrial states, they're all going to become solidly Republican. That was kind of the assumption because you have a population that has a lower percentage that's college educated, more white. And so it looked like it was a place that would be ripe for the picking for Republicans, not just in 2016, but it would kind of continue to trend in that direction. And it looks like, first of all, that didn't turn out to be true. Biden ends up winning Wisconsin in 2020, even before Roe versus Wade is overturned. But with abortion, you've actually significantly pushed things back in the other direction. And so what was shocking about the win of that liberal Supreme Court justice was not just that she won. I mean, Wisconsin's a closely divided state, so that's not crazy. It was that she won by 11 points. And the issue of abortion, it's not like they can just sort of write it out and hope this thing goes away. It's continued to show real salience as more horror stories comes out, as more, laws are passed across the country, as it's a hot topic of debate within Republican presidential politics about, are we going to do a national abortion ban? And I thought it was really interesting because there was actually a polling memo that, put this up on the screen, that somebody accidentally left behind from a Republican group. They say left behind polling memo shows abortion hurting outlook for the GOP.
At the Greenbrier. Someone put this in the trash at the Greenbrier.
Which is this West Virginia resort that Republicans, it's owned by Jim Justice, by the way, who is currently governor and gonna run for Senate against Joe Manchin. By the way, I saw a poll that has him up by like 20 points on Manchin, so we could talk about that another time.
It's swanky.
It's very swanky. Yeah. It's very nice. It's beautiful there. So anyway, they left it in the trash there, and the numbers here are quite dire. They say there's been a 6-point swing in just the last year on the generic Senate ballot from R+3 to D+3. This movement is led overwhelmingly by independent and new voters that identify abortion as one of their top issues. It's according to a national issue study by Coefficient, which was in the news recently. So they found similar findings on the House side, 10-point swing in just the last year on the generic House ballot, where previously Republicans were winning on the generic ballot by 6 points, now Democrats winning by 4 points, and they say reproductive freedom is the #1 issue among those that did not vote in 2020. So this has been an incredibly activating issue. In Wisconsin on Election Day, with that liberal Supreme Court justice winning, there were all these sorts of anecdotal reports about how strong the voting had been in college, like university towns there. And after the fact, we've gotten the numbers that has in fact been the case. Young people very classically unreliable in terms of their voting behavior. But that's what they're finding is not just in the college towns, but across the state and in all the states where this issue is super relevant. New voters are turning out. It's really motivating independent voters, and it is a significant problem for Republicans.
It's a huge problem for Republicans, and I've actually been skeptical of the theory that abortion was what killed certain candidacies in the last election. But this is, the more this evidence emerges, I mean, you have to keep an open mind with this stuff. And I think this evidence, this polling evidence, has really, really shifted the weight of the argument to the fact that abortion is genuinely dragging down Republicans. If even Republican pollsters are finding these 6-point swings, I mean, that's significant stuff. And I think that's not to say that I think it's necessarily a losing issue for Republicans. I think there's the old Ronald Reagan mantra. He talks about painting with bold colors, not pale pastels, which is really, it's like, that's how he ends up winning the youth vote in huge numbers. And there are a lot of people who didn't agree with everything that Ronald Reagan said. He was seen as this movement conservative, activist type Republican, an ideologue for sure. And yet people voted for him. So I think there's a way for Republicans to talk about abortion more honestly that may drag them down in certain areas, but in other areas may be helpful if you have a certain kind of candidate. Ron DeSantis puts up big numbers in Florida, with people who haven't always voted Republican. And I think partially that's because he doesn't shy away from the issue. He doesn't try to hide the issue and be apologetic about his beliefs on abortion. So if I were a consultant for Republicans, I would say you just need to be honest about what you think. That said, it is absolutely true that if you can't match if you can't put up higher numbers as opposed to the new voters coming in, if you can't motivate, for instance, in Wisconsin, we were all sitting here on election night not too long ago looking at the numbers in Wisconsin, and we were seeing, for instance, in what's called the WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington, always a bastion of hard Republican voting.
These are suburban areas, right?
Suburban Milwaukee, yep, absolutely. And the numbers were obviously, Republicans were winning those areas, but the numbers were down, the margins were down, and that's because millennials are now moving to the suburbs, and they're sure as hell not voting Republican in the same numbers as other people were. So it's a real problem.
But even with the DeSantis example, so before he gets reelected, he signed it was either a 12 or 15-week abortion ban into law, and he felt pretty comfy with that. The 6-week abortion ban that they just passed through, he clearly felt like politically he had to do it. Passed it on a Friday evening, did the press conference literally at midnight. It was let's not talk about this. Let's just try to move forward. And I think that illustrates the problem that Republicans have right now is They have won on this issue in the past when they've successfully, first of all, their base was super motivated to get Supreme Court justice on and overturn Roe versus Wade. Okay, well, that energizing factor is now gone for them.
Yeah.
And the other thing that they did, which was successful for them, is they would paint the Democrats as the extremists. You know, partial birth abortion, and you know, what the latest? What's the one? That they claim that like after the baby's delivered, that Democrats wanted. They just claim Democrats are like really extreme on the issue, and they put the focus there on the most sort of fringe examples that Democrats will support. Very effective politically. Well, now, given the way that the landscape has changed, necessarily, because Roe versus Wade was already kind of the compromise position. So the compromise position is gone. So now necessarily all the fronts that they're fighting on are extreme and are fringe. So, you know, a 6-week abortion ban or the heartbeat or the personhood stuff, like these have very limited popularity. It's a very small part, even of the Republican base, that supports some of the most stringent restrictions here. Certainly a nationwide ban is like wildly unpopular. It's like less popular than defund the police, which is famously, you know, as a slogan, very unpopular. But that's the only ground that's left to fight on. And the pro-life base is very organized. They are not content with Roe versus Wade being overturned. So it's sort of like necessarily the turf that's being fought on is very extreme in terms of Republicans. It makes it a lot easier. I know they've been trying to pivot to like, let's talk about partial birth abortion again. But it's hard when the current stories that are coming out of, you know, women who are like being told go bleed out in the parking lot, and when you're on death's door, that maybe we'll treat you. Those are the sorts of things that are now happening every day because of the restrictions that are being passed into law in these states. So I don't know how you get out of that without, you know, just like shifting your stance on the issue.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that is absolutely the strategy because, and by the way, people like Ralph Northam and Andrew Cuomo make it really easy for Republicans to point to examples of like, listen, this is a so-called like moderate centrist Democrat who has some pretty unpopular positions on third-term abortion. And that, though, we've seen, first of all, you have to talk about that proactively. You can't wait for the media to start like jumping on you. You have to like actually be going after that, want to talk about abortion and want to say X, Y, and Z, which most Republicans don't. Like Ryan and I were on air together when Roe v. Wade, the decision or the Dobbs decision was handed down.
Yeah.
First thing I said was, the Republican people over at the RNC right now are scared out of their minds. They hate this. Like they're not happy about this at all. Because to your point, that was always the thing that they could say, I support, you know, this, like.
Right.
And when you lose that, you have to go on offense. Otherwise, you're going to look terrible. You're going to look like you're hiding from the issue, like you're a secret extremist. And that's what we've seen Republicans do. So the pro-life movement right now is really trying to get Republicans to rally around that Lindsey Graham bill, the 12-week thing. And there's a lot of hesitancy on that because some people want to go further and some people think it goes too far. And it's a huge albatross, I think, right now because nobody knows how to talk about it. And nobody knows what they actually believe because for a long time, and I think this is still true, those people at the RNC, they don't know what they believe on abortion. And if they do know, they probably wish Roe were still in place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Trump picked up on this right away.
Yes.
Reportedly, he said right away, this is going to be a major problem for us. And you can see, you know, he's pissed off a lot of the pro-life groups by being like, listen, I'm going to sell what I did when I was in office by putting these justices on there, but am I going to commit to anything else? No, because politically, this is incredibly toxic. And it's part of why, you know, in the 2024 race, there's this assumption like, oh, Ron DeSantis would be more electable than Trump. And maybe, but I'm not even 100% sure about that because this issue has become so potent and so toxic. And he now has this 6-week ban hung around his neck and has taken a more like aggressively, overtly right-wing stance in terms of abortion. I do think that'll make it more difficult for him if he makes it to a general election and cuts into his electability case. And actually, I don't know if it's related to this or not, but I actually just saw some numbers that the Republican base thinks Trump is a stronger candidate to win in a general election. So this central pitch from DeSantis, maybe he still is able to make it land with the base. Maybe that becomes the thing that they're most concerned about and they're persuaded by his argument. But as of today, he hasn't been able to win that debate.
Yeah, then there's, you know, there's some evidence on that side, which that Donald Trump was always able to pick up voters that Republicans never were. And those are people that are probably not going to vote for just your average Republican career politician. And, you know, The last thing I'd say is that actually one of Trump's best political moments is when he went on offense in a debate against Hillary Clinton. And whether or not you agree, if anyone agrees with what he said about abortion, he painted a very vivid picture and just went in on Hillary Clinton. And that is, I think, an example of where going on offense from a strategic messaging perspective for Republicans can be really strong and really valuable. But then if you have 6-week bans, for instance, it makes it much harder. Like, that takes some of the power away from doing that. So there's no question
It makes
about
it much harder to shift the focus. I mean, I've always said, Americans, I think, on this issue, you obviously have, you have your ideologues who this is their number one issue and they're clustered at the extremes and they drive most of the debate. Yeah. Most Americans overwhelmingly, they see it as a moral issue. They see it as a difficult and tricky issue. Mm-hmm. And they have these sort of like mixed and moderate stances on it, which I really relate to and I think agree with, actually. And so whichever party seems to be embracing the most like fringe part of this argument, they're going to be losing on this issue. Yeah. And Democrats have been in that position where they've been effectively painted as the extremists on the issue. And now Republicans, given the new landscape, I think it's just very hard for them to escape that box. And clearly it is very motivating. So interesting data there out of your home state of Wisconsin. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.